draws from. And it's just really nice to have it as a supplement. But this website is in Canvas, and I'll also put it in the chat box. And then I will stop talking so that you can read the questions. It'll take maybe, oh, I didn't get the whole thing. It'll take about 10 or so minutes. And if you don't get it done, that's okay. You can always do it later. It's just something that's nice to potentially review while you are listening today. Yes, and it's not next week, Cheryl, it's in 2 weeks. So you still get credit for today. It's just next time, in 2 weeks, will be the supplement and kind of the second half of what we're doing today. So go ahead and do this short quiz on that website, and feel free to keep putting your questions in the chat, but I will go on mute so that I'm not tempted to talk and interrupt you. Oh, 2 more minutes. Vicki, are you on Lend Training? Can you make me the host, please? You just hover over me in the participant list. Now I'm not seeing Vicki on there anymore. Are you seeing her, Jen? Oh yeah. Jen, do you think you could text her and see if she's able to hear us? I'm not sure if she is. Oh, yay, she got it. Okay. Thank you, Vicki. All right. 1 more minute and I'll get my slides back up and then we'll get going. And obviously you all don't have the answer sheet provided because we're not in person, but please keep those responses and your results handy for later, as well as next time. And I did make a mistake. I put it in the chat box. We do meet next Monday from 1 to 3 for the second part of this material. I got confused because the Lend trainees also have another DEI session in leadership in the leadership course next Tuesday from 3 to 5. So, but we will finish this material next week. All right, so today you are here for Successfully Navigating Difficult Conversations, Part 1. I am Steph Weber, and we will get going. Kelly is going to be the chat box champion for me today. So I can see you, Kelly, so just give me a wave like this when you want to stop me. Feel free to stop at any time. We're going to try to do some things today with small breakout rooms, large group discussion, but really today is going to be kind of heavy on the material. And then here is your heads up that next session, when we meet next week, there will be role plays. And I know role plays are awkward even in person, but they're especially awkward on camera. But role plays are essential for learning. So we offer them as part of our program in this area. So this section is going to cover some basic objectives that we're really going to carry into the next session as well. So we're going to talk about the basic conflict resolution styles that we know from the research, and particularly drawing from the Thomas Kilmann group, from the Thomas Kilmann inventory that the Lend cohort members were asked to complete by today. We know that some of you are going to still finish it tonight. That's totally fine. We're going to talk about the aspects of a crucial conversation, as well as getting a sense of your own approaches. What do you default to? And really thinking back of, you default to that because you were raised that way. So how do we mainly break some of those bad habits, and how do we identify what are the appropriate ways to respond in which contexts? There's no bad way of responding. It's just your default. We tend to overuse it, and it's not always appropriate given the certain context. And then, of course, like everything else, we want to talk about the MCH competencies that will be strengthened in using these skills in difficult conversations. And I apologize, Easton is going to bed, so I'm going to shut my door. Okay, so jumping off from the MCH competencies, as we talked about at the end of last semester, we're really kind of continuing always to reflect on ourselves. So this style under stress self-assessment, the TKI that many folks will take, as well as the ethics and professionalism of your own discipline and what you've been trained under, and kind of what is your go-to gut feeling for what feels right, or what feels like, this is where crucial conversations come from, because it's like, ooh, that doesn't feel right to me. That sends up my gut warning, my red flags of something's not right about this, and I need to address it. Also, critical thinking. How do you take a breath, think through a situation, rely on your discipline skills, rely on your training, rely on your personality at times before you act? So we're always going to be reflecting on ourselves. But this semester, we're really getting into how do we navigate situations with others, and then further in the wider community. So anything we do is going to focus on communication. And the main thing I want to challenge you all to do during this session and next week is to pay attention in your conversations that you're having over the next few weeks and listen for the context. So the things that are unsaid, the things that are a bit hidden. And we talk about this in the world of autism as the hidden curriculum, but there's no way around it. There's things that are what we call expressed emotion, the way that people behave, the way that people feel that remains unspoken. Wouldn't it be nice if we all just said how we felt? I'm frustrated right now. That would make life a lot easier for many people, not just people on the autism spectrum, right? But how we have to go about that is a skill of listening and taking in, and really it's what boils down to emotional intelligence, and which is why we have a lot of literature that focus on emotional intelligence being more beneficial in the workplace for success than even IQ. And so we want to focus in on building leaders that have really strong emotional intelligence and the ability to listen and focus on context, not content. Content is what people are saying, but context is how they are saying it and what comes around it. With negotiation and conflict resolution, it's no different than anything else we hear at Cincinnati Children's, that safety comes first. We always want to maintain safety, but oftentimes when we're talking about critical or crucial conversations, we're talking about psychological safety, how a person feels when it comes to their defenses. And sometimes you'll even see it physically, like people are like, no, I don't want to talk about that, right? Like they'll inherently put up their hands, turn their head away because they can't psychologically handle it. We have to come back and find a way to build safety. And we're going to talk about some skills over the next couple of weeks, how we can get back into that place of safety. Cultural competency, obviously this applies across all disciplines, situations, settings. And again, we say this all the time, but cultural competency is the language that MCH uses. We use cultural responsiveness. So I will definitely change that on my slides. But we want to be able to be culturally responsive, because the way in which that you approach a situation with someone potentially of the same socioeconomic status as you may be different than the way you approach a situation of someone with different socioeconomic status, or insert any cultural factor. And then finally, this is all the fundamentals of playing nice on a team, right? We all want to play nice in the sandbox. That is what gets us the best outcomes for our patients. We definitely know that from research, is that when we are a well-functioning team, we're balancing power, we are supporting the family and the patient, and we are including them as a member of the team, everybody wins. And then finally, as we go out along that circle into the wider community, countless times will you have conversations with school districts and stakeholders, policymakers in that regard, that could be uncomfortable at times, right? We haven't had a single comfortable conversation around COVID, I don't think, since it started. It's all makes people feel a certain way, right? Whether it's this or whatever way on the spectrum you fall, nobody seems to be able to get along on a lot of things. And I think I mentioned this to you before, but I've been asked to speak on socio-emotional development of kids wearing masks in school, being out of school, being quarantined. You're going to be asked these things as leaders, and especially as leaders who understand and are leaders in the developmental disabilities arena, because we're a small field, honestly. So people are going to come to you and ask you for your input, and it could feel uncomfortable at times because other people may not agree, or they may just not know. So getting comfortable with that uncomfortable feeling. Start now. Because all of you have learned this, and you all learned it in kindergarten. And I won't even ask who did kindergarten, because some folks on this line, on the call today, maybe didn't do kindergarten, and that's okay. But the general idea is that we learned this in preschool and in early life. We learned this with our siblings. We've learned this with our caregivers, whether they were our biological parents or our aunts or uncles or whoever we lived with. We've had these experiences. We did really learn how to navigate critical conversations successfully all the way back when we were little. Because we were taught to share, we were taught to play fair, we were taught not to hit, we were taught to clean up after our own mess and put things back where we found them, not taking things that aren't ours. And in an adult world, that's Don't own someone else's emotion. How important is it to say sorry, right? We're going to talk about that as well. Flush, that will come into play as well. We all need to get rid of the bad and just move on. Taking a break sometimes, so taking a nap every afternoon, wouldn't this be lovely now as adults? And I think this is really important. And Dick and Jane is probably something none of you have ever heard of. I was not raised on Dick and Jane, but at least I'm familiar with it. But the Dick and Jane books always taught you to watch out for traffic, hold hands, stick together. And the biggest, most important thing of all is to look. And that's what I want to challenge you all. And when you're in these conversations, don't get wrapped up in your own head. Don't get wrapped up in the physiology of what's going on with your sweating lip like I get, or your sweating armpits, or your sweating palms, or your upset tummy, or your tight muscles, but look at what's going on around you in the other person, because that's going to be the most important. So I have a short video with our sweet Robin Williams on conflict. Let me make sure that the audio is going to share. Share sound. And let me, Kelly, if you can give me a thumbs up if it's loud enough once I start it.
Conflict!
Right, but my friend.
Good.
And this is the two-headed monster.
Hello!
And we're here to tell you all about the word conflict.
Conflict!
Right, conflict. You guys ready to show conflict?
Ready!
Okay, here we go. The two-headed monster showing us conflict.
Paano ba na chiki Kosovo? Oh, ikete mo on the bado!
Time out, guys. Guys,
What?
I'm not sure you understand. We need to show everyone conflict.
Conflict!
Right, but I'm afraid that wasn't conflict.
No conflict.
No, you see, a conflict was when two people fight or disagree about something, and they have a conflict.
Oh, conflict! Yeah, conflict!
Okay, great.
Conflict!
We're ready to try again? Okay, here we go. The two-headed monster is now going to show us conflict. Take two.
Beneficial, ma!
One of them has a flower he says is his. That's a promising start.
Hindi mo na oda ma!
Looks like the other one wants the same flower. This could be some conflict.
Vegetable liquor ball! Share?
Oh, they're sharing. Okay, stop. Look, that was very nice. That was lovely, actually. You were sharing, and that warms the cockles of my heart. But listen, my fuzzy two-headed friend, that was not conflict.
No conflict!
No conflict.
No conflict!
I'm just sorry, it wasn't.
No conflict! Wait! What?
I just realized something.
What?
We disagree. We're arguing about something.
So?
We're having a conflict.
Conflict?
Conflict.
So I just love that video. It's so basic, but how awesome is it that Sesame Street teaches our kids about conflict and about some of those adult concepts. And I can tell you that even more today than any time in history are things like emotional competencies being taught in preschool programs like Daniel Tiger or Sesame Street. Even the only show I let my son watch is Paw Patrol. And we do a lot of talking about, oh, that made so-and-so feel really mad. So I think that the more and more we talk about it from a young age, the more normalized it becomes, because for many of us growing up, emotions were meant to be stifled. And especially that is pertinent in many cultures. You are very stoic, or you just hide or bottle it up. And we know that that leads to more mental health concerns and clinical depression and anxiety. So conflict is meant to be resolved and that it can be healthy. And so when we think about the Thomas Kilmann approach, we have these 5 modes, and they run along the continuum of cooperativeness and assertiveness. So you'll see The horizontal is cooperativeness. So you can be uncooperative all the way through to fully cooperative, and then unassertive all the way through to assertive. So none of these modes, and I'll say this over and over again, but none of these modes are inherently bad. Can't emphasize that enough. Nobody is bad because they default to avoiding, right? You maybe have already filled out your TKI and you've gotten your results and you're like, oh my God, I'm a world-class avoider. That is okay, right? Avoiding just means that that is your tendency. That is where you default, not a problem. Accommodating, well, I'm sorry, so let's stick with avoiding. Avoiding just means that you are at all costs not going to want to deal with conflict. You are uncooperative when it comes to inserting yourself. You are unassertive about getting in there, right? You just don't want to deal with it. You'll find any reason to not participate. Then if we're on the staying with cooperativeness, if we're more of the accommodating mode, you're going to cooperate, you're going to be participating in the conversation, but you're more likely the one that's not going to assert your own wants and needs and feelings. You're not going to provide your supervisor your ideas. You're not going to tell your spouse, hey, I really don't like it when I'm the one that has to do the dishes every day, right? You're just going to do it and you're going to swallow it all down. And where that leads, that's up to you. And you know, but oftentimes those accommodating modes most often lead to resentment and bottling up emotions that then pops off later. Now, partway through each, the cooperativeness and the assertiveness is compromising. And this is oftentimes seen as, yeah, you get something you want, but you have to give up something. And this can be a really great mode to default to because it is kind of balancing that, okay, I'll assert my emotions, thoughts, feelings, and wants, but I'm also willing to listen. So oftentimes we think about being on teams, working with families, working with patients, that compromising is a great place to be because we're giving a little, but we're also letting others get a little too. Then if you get up into the assertive category, where you're uncooperative, you're more in that competing domain. And there's many times where this can be most beneficial. Anybody want to unmute or put in the chat box when competing might be the most beneficial mode to use? In what situations, I should say?
Maybe in a situation where like there's less room for interpretation on what's maybe like right. I'm thinking like things with like racial reconciliation. There's like a time when you are not wavering, like, no, this is what's right.
Totally. I love that example. Yeah. Others, think about it. We work in a hospital. Yeah, maybe Maria says leadership or administrative. Sometimes, yeah, there's just no budge. Yep.
I feel like maybe if you have a project and wanting to complete it in a timely manner, or like you're competing to get it done, or also like we want to be the best hospital, we want the best research, we want the best answers.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep.
I
love it. Yeah.
Thinking
Patient
similarly.
safety, I see. Go ahead, Shannon. Sorry.
I was just going to say, I was kind of thinking about like the COVID vaccine and the race to like create like a COVID vaccine and get it approved. And there was like all different companies trying to do that really quickly and competing with each other.
Absolutely. Yeah. Life and death situations, right? Like ER docs, ED docs, they have to think quickly and they have to be very assertive, right? Because life and death situations, patient safety situations, you have to think on your feet quickly. And sometimes, you know, there may be conflicts that arise, but a decision has to be made because somebody's at risk. And Cheryl points out maybe to build camaraderie around competing for a goal. That could be, right? You have, you know, divisions working towards, you know, raising funds, and there's that competition that builds camaraderie, right? So competing is not a bad thing. And that's why I stop and come up with examples, because competing is not a bad thing, just like avoiding is not a bad thing. There's a time and place for all these modes, right? In most outpatient settings and most of the work that we will do in developmental disabilities and in leadership of whatever, you know, in this field, we are going to be able to strive for more of the collaborating. So high on cooperativeness, high on assertiveness, because we have time potentially, right? Sometimes it might not feel like that because we're all in like fast-paced clinics and we're like, what is going on? What time do you think you have, Steph? But when we think about it in the scheme of things comparatively to other industry or inpatient where it's life or death, we do have some time to build more of that space and ability to collaborate, have meetings where we're brainstorming, where we're really hashing things out and thinking through what things look like, how they might play out, or compromising, right? So these are the two that we're most likely going to strive for, but that's not saying that these three don't have a place at the table in certain circumstances, okay? So this is just another graphic for looking at that. And I like this because it kind of talks about the goal. You might avoid, but the goal is to delay. So I always think about myself back in grad school when I was like, hey, how can I not see my dissertation advisor? Because I definitely spent the weekend partaking in alcoholic beverages instead of writing my dissertation, right? So my goal wasn't just to avoid it. My goal was just to delay that meeting until I could get caught up. I was uncooperative, but not in the bad sense. Like, I'll get there eventually, but the goal is to delay that uncomfortability. Accommodating, the goal is to yield. So to give in, not really give your perspectives. And I think as students in supervision or as early career professionals that are still in supervision, we see a lot of accommodating. And I think that with certain supervisors, this is very appropriate. This is the mode that they want. And in other cases, they'd really rather you assert yourself, and they want to see you be able to think on your feet. And these are conversations to have with them. How much do you want me to assert myself in the moment when we're in the room with the family versus how much do you want me to bring up my ideas in supervision, right? Have these conversations at the outset. And so the cooperative scale is attempting to satisfy others' concerns. So how much are you likely to accommodate and give in versus satisfying your own concerns and competing, right? The goal would be to win, to get your way. Collaborating is to find that win-win, and compromising is to find middle ground. You'll hear the word collaborating in interdisciplinary care over and over and over again, because the goal is to find a win-win. The goal is to bring what we know about best practices and match that with our clinical judgment and the family's values and what they want with their priorities, right? That would be a win-win. We'll default to a compromise, but our goal is for collaboration. So the other thing that I want to point out is sometimes it also looks at that this issue to one person is just unimportant. It might be that person is avoiding because they just don't feel like it's that important for them to engage in something that could be uncomfortable. Versus they feel like if they don't deal with this, it's going to really bubble up and become a problem. So this is how you could also see that scale. Versus I think about the cooperativeness scale as more about relationships. So how much is the person wanting to build the relationship, and is that unimportant to them? They might avoid. If it's important to them, they might accommodate, right? And then substance or product or outcome you can insert here. So I always, and we've talked about this, I want to say even last week, the balance between getting a project done and maintaining relationships for the long term. And you're going to see this over and over and over again. And I think even somebody has had that experience recently where it's like, oh, I don't want to upset this person because I want to maintain this relationship, but I have to be all done with this project. And I just, there is no more deliverable for me here. So how do I balance deliverables and relationships, deliverables and relationships? And I can tell you for me personally, it took me a long time because I was such a relationship oriented person to even see that substance was important. I was like, it'll get done. I'll do it myself if I have to. It'll always get done, but I need to maintain those relationships. And then the more I get into my career, the more I'm like, well, yeah, all right. We need to delegate. We need to work together. We need to all do our part. The substance is important as well. But I kind of had to just reflect on who I am as a person. And I want to challenge you guys to do that too. Where do you feel you fall You know, whether it's shows up on the TKI or not, are you more of a person who relies on building relationships or focuses on the deliverable and the outcome? So, oh, I have a really cute video, but I'm gonna have to stop share because I think that it's no longer like, and you've probably all seen it because it's so cute. But I love this video, and let me pull it up on YouTube. Okay, I think the parents also realized it's so cute, and so they were like, no, we're gonna make it pay for purchase or something. So we have to watch it on the Daily Mail now. Okay.
Oh, it's raining. No. Hey, it's raining. No,
Oh, I'm sorry. I should set this up. So we have little kids in a preschool or a daycare. And you have this little girl in the green shirt and her twin sister, and then this little boy in the white shirt. And the boy and this girl are arguing over whether or not it's sprinkling or raining outside. Very important.
sprinkling. No, it's raining. My mom told me it's sprinkling. It was raining. No. Yes, it is. My mom told me it was sprinkling, not raining. My mom said it is raining. No, my mom told me it's sprinkling. Because my mom said it's raining. No, my mom said it's raining. My mom said it's raining. Ow! My mommy said it's. Say sorry to the sprinkling. My mom told me it's wiggling. My mom is not. It's Mommy, it's wiggling outside, Macy. Mommy said raining. No, it's not. Yes, it is. No, you're pretty. You're not real. I'm real. Watch. We're gonna go out there and see. I'm not gonna see anymore. Watch is not gonna see. Watch. We're gonna go out there and watch. It was just raining. Because it's raining. No, it's not. It just rained. It just raining. Ow! It just raining. Little Clay, it's raining. You broke my heart. Little Clay. You broke my heart. Turn around and then I'm gonna get honey. And he'll kiss me now. Okay, dear. You broke my heart. Turn around.
So it was a little hard to hear, and the captions aren't great on that version. But basically, the little boy said, no, it already rained. My mom said, and then the little girl came in and said, no, it's sprinkling. My mom said, and then her twin sister steps in to try to mediate and says, well, why don't we just go out the window and look? Decide for ourselves. And then my favorite line was, he says, you're pretty, you're not real, I'm real, because that's the ultimate toddler dig, I suppose. But when we go back to looking at those modes, what did we see in the little girl? What modes did we see in the main little girl in the green shirt? Not the sibling. Put them in the chat or shout it out.
She was competing.
Totally competing, right? I'm gonna do it. Like even pointing the finger. Like you'll see these kinds of things. You'll see people behave in these ways as adults, and it's so bizarre. But they do behave these ways, and you'd never imagine. You really wouldn't, but people do. People will point fingers, they will say things in extremes. But yeah, totally competing. How about the boy? Yep, I see some more competing in the chat box. Yeah. How about our twin sister, who I like to point out always that it seems as though she has a little bit more difficulty with verbal language and speech than her other sister. But yeah, more compromising. I just love that she's like, wait, guys, let's go look out the window and decide for ourselves. What did all of them do, though? They all defaulted to research, right? They all defaulted to, well, my mom said so. And as a toddler, that's where you get all of your knowledge is from your mom. And then the middle girl, she said, wait, let's go look. Let's take our own research into account and we'll figure this out together. So when all else fails, we go to our mode, we default to our mode, we go to the research, and we try to figure out in that mode, what would be the best thing, right? And in this case, probably compromising or collaborating. I love this video. I just think it's really cute and hopefully will help this concept stick with you guys. But for even more laughs, there is an adult version where adults play out these characters. It is not safe for work, so watch it on your own time, but it's enjoyable. So I'll leave it there. But again, just a good example of we learn these things so early on, right? So many people expect kids at 2 to be able to share. Not developmentally appropriate till 5 or 6. But all of these things are building the foundation for what we will use in adulthood. So, and when it all boils down to it, I draw from Maslow's hierarchy of needs because I think now during COVID, it's more important than ever. Unless our physiological needs are met, and I love this image because, you know, good old Abe here, he just looks so fun. Unless our physiological needs are met, we can't really focus on even safety. We can't focus on love and belonging. We can definitely not focus on esteem. And so many of our patients and so many of our colleagues are dealing with, I don't know where I might get my next paycheck. I don't know if I'm gonna have a job next month. I don't know whether or not I'm gonna have childcare and whether I'm gonna be able to come into work, right? We are living in some really challenging times right now. And we have got to make sure this basic foundation is met before we can even focus in on keeping people psychologically safe. We have to keep them physiologically and physically safe. So I just want to point that out and keep that in mind, that we can't underestimate the importance of these needs. So I'm just going to jump into a little bit about the history of conflict in business research, because that's where it ultimately started. And really up until the 70s, folks in business wanted to avoid conflict. And I think we mentioned this before last week of that, the leadership style of the boss says and the employee does. And that's just the way it was for a long, long time. And the more and more, you know, the newer, younger generations came into the workforce, they wanted to hear why. Why am I doing this? What is the purpose for this? How can I have a stake in it? And so Thomas and Kilman are our partners, and they came together to develop and disseminate their instrument in the late 1970s. And what their work really did was focus on this notion that conflict is natural, it's part of the human experience, but it can have an impact, negative or positive, on performance and productivity in the workplace. And this has been studied, like I mentioned, in business, so in private sectors, as well as in hospital-based healthcare across the board. And really focusing in on the organizational climate, where it's, you know, that negative conflict that's impacting performance and productivity is termed dysfunctional, versus functional conflict, where we can drive change, but we have to have time and space for it. And you have to have leaders that allow for it. And this is where it can get caught up even today. When you have a leader, a manager, boss who doesn't facilitate and allow for conflict to occur, you don't get that functional benefit. You don't get that let's take things to the next step or think about things in a different way. And what we do know as well about some studies that put conflict resolution styles or modes to, you know, to really studying how people play out in their lives is that in business, so bank managers were studied in one area, where those that were mid or junior level bank managers were more likely to be, guess what? Our double A's are accommodating and are avoiding, right? Because they're not the big boss. They're in middle level management or junior levels. And so they feel like they have to do what their boss tells them to do. Additionally, the nursing field does some great research on emotional intelligence competencies, and some studies came out about that the higher the emotional intelligence, the more likely the nurse was able to match the conflict resolution mode with the situation. So again, it goes hand in hand with your emotional intelligence. You're more likely to be able to read the scenario, be able to figure out, okay, I need to hop into a competing mode right here because we've got to get this done. Or I need to hop into an accommodating mode because I got to maintain this relationship for the long term because this person has this skill set that we need on our team. Unsurprisingly, students prefer to avoid, but with training, we see particularly some studies that I think we can extrapolate to other areas are that nurses and females are more likely to then with training prefer compromising. But we also know that preferences or their default modes can change. So like I said before, I think I used to be more of an accommodator or a compromiser. And then you can ask Jen, I've become over the years much more of a competitor, compromiser, collaborator, to the point where I've gotten feedback personally that's you probably need to pick and choose because you may be going into conflict too frequently or when it's not necessary. So thinking about that over time, that these modes can change depending on, you know, whether or not you're a parent now, whether or not you're a spouse now, what other factors are going on in your life. So that's why we train. We teach about this because we know they can change, and we can try to hit it more the nail on the head with this scenario matches this this mode. And it's not always going to be black and white, which scenario and which mode is going to be best for which scenario. It depends on you and the context around you. But the reasons that people avoid are plentiful. People lack motivation. It's just like, oh God, I don't have the time, space, energy. In the disability field, it's their spoons. They don't have their spoons, right? I should say chronic health as well. That's where that came from. Fear of emotions. So many folks are just like, I don't want this person to cry. I don't want this person to yell at me. I see Shannon on my screen, and social work, man, you can't fear emotionality because you're going to get a lot of emotions when you're getting into social work, right? So certain disciplines know that's part of their role, and other disciplines, it doesn't feel like part of their role. So it's really difficult. And then there's always that power structure. So, right, we have these chess pieces here. So a lot of times this avoidance comes with students and trainees because they're in supervision. And it's, well, if I bring this up to my supervisor, am I going to get a bad letter of recommendation, or will they write me one at all? Right. And so it's balancing so many factors of really kind of heavy emotion that we have to be mindful of. So again, questions to consider. When is avoidance appropriate? There's definitely times where it's like, yeah, we're just going to let this slide because we don't have the time, space, and energy to deal with this. When is engagement and conflict necessary? And do you have those resources, that psychological wherewithal to deal with it? And I sometimes even encourage folks that are going through a difficult, you know, I don't know, you seem to kind of always come back to the same patterns. And whether it's with a certain clinic, whether it's with a certain colleague, your spouse, your mother-in-law, whoever it is. And I kind of encourage folks to print these out and keep them handy in your view to just remind yourself, okay, is now the time for me to deal with this? Nope, it's not. Okay, but is now the time for me to deal with this? So just be kind of reflecting on these over time because it'll keep presenting itself with opportunities. So I'm going to stop there and see what questions folks have, if any.
I mean, I have a question because I think
Sure.
I mean, I also see these a lot of times playing out for people with disabilities, and I think sometimes it would be important. I think that, even talking to some of the friends who work in the field, there can be sort of for people with disabilities, myself included, being affected. It can be sort of either hyper one or the other, not because of necessarily just that person, but because of some of the competencies and some of the things, and then overcorrecting and some of the
Yeah.
systematic things, and how do we teach people with disabilities like other people sort of how to navigate those things. And I know for myself, I probably was more overly without being able to pick up some of those social cues, or not that I don't pick it up, but being able to interpret it and feel like I'm interpreting it well enough, because a lot of times I know something's happening. It's just hard to say 100% because it can mean 5 different things. So then I tend to be more accommodating in some ways, not wanting conflict, because conflict usually goes on the person with, with disability, and that we don't, and that, even this summer, like just getting a little, when we don't always let people with disabilities have their emotions, or how to have their
Yeah.
emotions in an appropriate, like in an appropriate way. Because I think sometimes we just want people to be happy, or don't, don't be sad, or.
Yeah, totally,
Sorry.
Jason. No, and I think with or without disabilities, and definitely don't want to diminish your experience as a person with lived experience, but I think conflict is hard for everyone.
Oh yeah.
And I think that the kind of that interpretation and reading the experiences, I agree. I think that there's definitely people with disabilities who really struggle. There's people without disabilities that really struggle.
Yeah. I think it
And-
goes
and
into
yeah.
the idea, like other marginalized people, there tends to be a power dynamic, and
Yes.
people
Totally
with
great point.
disabilities tend to not be usually at the bottom end of a power dynamic. It's very, very rare that a person with a disability is at the top of that. And you can also see some other great advocates who are really, really good, but also tend to be more assertive, and in some other, and even towards other advocates, and like, this is the only style. But I mean, I think too, it's also that like other groups, and some of the ways that we psycho, of sort of things incorrect, and something, sometimes the appropriate feelings of emotions, or having negative or something, you're sort of told to quench those emotions rather than how do you have those appropriately.
Absolutely.
Or in a way that is good for you, but then also, that you can have them, but not necessarily take up the whole space with them.
I love that point. And I think that that's where, even as we talk about the neurodiversity movement, and we could spend a lot of time, focused on, well, the neurodiversity extremists would say somebody should be able to just have their experience, and everybody else should just be able to deal with it, right? And it's like, wait a minute, what Jason is meaning by the term appropriate means the person gets their needs met, but also the community around them isn't completely thrown into disarray, right? We can't just have, young adults turning classrooms around because it feels good to them, right? They have to learn how to deal with the society as it is now, because that's what they're facing. And of course, we can advocate for, things in the disability world and neurodiversity, but we still have to understand that this is the way the society is, and these expectations are here and now.
Well, and also that, even if you do make some, which I would think there would be, and hopefully there is, because there's a lot of burden, and that's one of the reasons neurodivergent advocates talk about a lot of, like, I'm actually working to accommodate you a lot in some ways, and I think that's true. I know a lot of what I'm doing is trying to, but also, I think that's true, and even if the world was in some ways more understanding, there's always gives and goals between groups of people and how to set up a space. The idea is the social contract should be more equal and more equaled out, but there still has to be social contracts between groups of people. Even in autistic spaces, there's social contracts of what
absolutely
doesn't.
And I love that you set this up perfectly, because those social contracts are in many cases called rules, right? It's the expectations. And we see that in sports. I'm a big sports person. We see that in homes. We see that through law, right? Those social contracts are the ways in which we all agree, is the majority of us agree that this is the way we should carry about our business on the day-to-day. And so when we put this research into practice, we're seeing conflict every day, right? And so as I mentioned at the outset, The majority of these topics that we'll talk about over the next 2 weeks are drawn from this text, the Patterson Grenny group, and then also Difficult Conversations is another great text to have on your shelf or just peruse for your professional library. And then this woman, of course, because it's today, I'm gonna draw a blank on her name, but she has a quote later on. I got to see a really cool workshop done when I was a fellow of hers at Harvard, where we literally did really cool role plays, giving diagnoses, life and death diagnoses to families, and just sitting with that really raw, hard emotion. It was so powerful. So a lot of my examples or the way in which we've put together these sessions draw from her work too. So moving forward, what makes a crucial conversation? We have opposing opinions, and we saw that in the raining versus sprinkling video, right? One person thought it was raining, one person thought it was sprinkling. And to them, that brought about high emotion that, you know, we were even to the point where we were poking in the heart and poking in the eye. And for those kids, that was high stakes. And it goes back to these conversations sometimes for one person may feel really high stakes, and for the other person, maybe it doesn't feel high stakes. But you'll see that even if it's for one person, it means a lot. It's still going to be really powerful and make people feel psychologically defensive or on edge if they believe that it's you know, worthwhile or that there's high stakes behind it. So opposing opinions, strong emotions, high stakes. If you have this triangle, that leads to it being somewhat difficult. So what is our main objective? And that is to get all of the information, all of the things in the context out into the pool of shared meaning, not just the content, not just the what, but the how does it make me feel? That needs to also be shared. So this text is broken down into these 9 chapters. And so the rest of today, we're going to go through kind of the knowledge that is discussed in chapters 1 through 5. And then next week, we'll talk about 6 through 9. So we have to work on ourselves first, right? We learned this in kindergarten. We clean up after ourselves. We clean up our own mess. And we have to think about what is it that's constantly getting us stuck? What is our inability to solve problems, achieve our goals? And these are some nice questions that, again, I like to just refer back to, like, God, what is it that everybody's complaining about? What is it that's going on in the workplace that just is not working and people are wanting to fix it, but we're just spinning our wheels? Or what are the goals that we want that we're just not getting there? We're not being able to really, you know, get this clinical flow down, or we're not really recruiting the patients that we want for our research study. What are we missing? What are these problems that we're always trying to fix? Or just what are the personality clashes going on, right? What do people complain about? What's frustrating? Who is frustrating to us? And thinking about those things. So what I'm going to do here in a minute, and either take a snapshot of your camera, write these down, make sure that you and your small groups know, but I'm going to put you in small groups, and I would like for you to reflect on how you got your way when you were a child. So think back to when you wanted something. Did you go to your parents, your grandma, your grandpa, your caregivers, whoever was in your life? How did you get your way? And then also, how do you get your way now? And then if you were able to finish that quick survey at the beginning, the SUS results, see if that tells you anything about how you got your way when you were a child versus how you get your way now. We'll take a few minutes to do that, and then we'll come back together. But I'm going to create breakout rooms really quick. And there should be 2 to 3 of you per room. No, I'm gonna do 3 to 4 per room. So I'm gonna open those now, and you should get the invitation to go onto the room. And again, how did you get your way when you were a child? How do you get your way now? And any reflections you can glean from your survey results. Denise or Francois, are you having trouble with your invitation to the breakout room?